It's editing day for me, and I thought I'd take you behind the scenes and show you a few tricks in Photoshop to speed up your editing. If you've ever felt like your editing takes way too long or like your photos don't quite feel consistent from one session to the next, this is going to help, because today I'm walking you through how to batch edit in Photoshop using actions, specifically Greater Than Gatsby actions, and how to use them in a way that actually gives you more control, not less. But really, you could use what I'm teaching you today with any action set that you have, including your own or purchased ones. By the end of this video, you're going to know how to choose which photos to batch edit, how to create a custom folder for your favorite actions so you're not digging through a million options every time, how to batch edit efficiently inside Photoshop, and what pitfalls to avoid so your photos don't start to look overdone, and how to save your images quickly and automatically. And the reason this matters is simple. When your editing becomes faster and more consistent, you gain confidence in what you're delivering. You're not second guessing every image. You have a process. Now, before we jump in, I want to quickly talk about why I personally prefer Photoshop over Lightroom. I have tried switching to Lightroom so many times, and every time I come back to Photoshop. For me, it really comes down to control. In Photoshop, I can make every intentional specific adjustment to each image, whether that's color, tone, or small details, without affecting the entire photo in a way I don't want. And that level of control makes a noticeable difference in the final result. But I also wanted to say this because it's important. A trap in Photoshop is that you have so much control and you can do so much that it can actually slow you down if you're not careful. It's kind of like going into Costco. There's so much there, everything feels like a good option, and before you know it, you've spent way more time than you planned. And you walk out a little overwhelmed. Photoshop can feel the same way. If you don't have a system, it's really easy to over-edit, overthink, or just spend way too long on each image. So the goal here isn't to use everything Photoshop can do. It's to create a simple, repeatable workflow that gives you consistency and keeps your editing efficient. And that's exactly what we're going to build in this video. So let's jump in. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Choosing the right images. When I batch edit, I'm selecting about 8 to 15 images, usually closer to 10, sometimes even less. And the key here is that they all have the same lighting, not necessarily the same scene, but the same light. You can move your subject, shift your angle, or change your composition slightly. But if the light stays consistent, your edit will translate across all of the images. If the lighting changes, batch editing starts to fall apart. So this step is really important. Once I have those images selected, I open them into ACR, which is Adobe Camera Raw. If you're familiar with Lightroom, this is very similar. It's basically Photoshop's version of Lightroom, and it's where I create my base edit. Now, I'm not doing anything heavy here. My goal in ACR is just to make sure the image is healthy. So the first thing I look at is skin tone. I check my RGB values to make sure they look natural. Typically red is slightly higher than green and green is slightly higher than blue. So the way I do that is you just hover right here and I can see that all of that looks good. Then I take a quick look at my histogram and make sure that it has a healthy curve. With the histogram, I just want to make sure that I'm not blowing out highlights or clipping shadows. I'm really just using everything in here as a starting point, not a finished edit. If you'd like a slower, more detailed video of what I do in ACR, I'll link a video that I made a few weeks ago right here, so you can go back and look at it with a lot more information. But in the effort of keeping things moving along today, I'm going to go ahead and open these, since this is more of a Photoshop tutorial, and we'll begin there. Once I have one image in ACR where I want it, I sync it across the rest. And this is where being intentional really matters. I don't just sync everything, I sync the adjustments that should stay consistent. Things like exposure, white balance, and general color adjustments. But I'm more careful with things like cropping or spot removal because those don't always translate across every image. And honestly, I usually do those in Photoshop. And the reason this works is because all of these images were shot in the same lighting, so the adjustments apply cleanly across all of them. If the lighting were different, this wouldn't work. And that's why that first step is so important. This is really where batch editing begins, not in Photoshop, but in choosing the right images and creating a strong base. If you get this part right, everything that comes after becomes much faster and easier and way more consistent. Okay, once my images are actually in Photoshop, I'm going to straighten, clean, and crop. I always do the straightening, cleaning, and cropping first because it sets the foundation for the entire edit. If your image isn't straight or your composition feels off or there are distractions in the background, no amount of color editing is going to fix that. So I start by straightening the image, usually using horizon lines, door frames, or anything vertical in the image. Then I clean up any distractions. This could be things in the background, small objects, stray hairs, anything that pulls attention away from the subject. Because your eye will always go to the distraction first. And this is one of the biggest differences between a good photo and a polished professional image. Then I crop. I'm thinking about composition, balance, and where my subject sits in the frame. And I do this before I start editing color because cropping changes your composition. And I want that locked in first. Editing enhances a photo, but composition and cleanup are what make it feel finished. All right, so now let's look at the Greater Than Gatsby actions. You can see here there are a lot of them, and that's one of the things I actually really like about these. They're very specific and they're organized in the order you should use them. When I first got these, I spent about a week just playing with them, testing different combinations and getting familiar with how they work. I chose the Bohemian Rhapsody set because it aligned really well with my style of editing. So I'm not going to go through all of these because there are a lot, but I do want to show you how I use them quickly because the goal here is not just to create a beautiful edit, it's to create a repeatable system. So typically, I'm using about 3 to 4 actions per image. And because I created a strong base in ACR, this part goes really quickly. So instead of editing each image one by one, I'm going to run this action across all these images at once. To do this, you go to File, Automate, Batch. Select your action, set Source to Open Files, set Destination to None, and click OK. And then I repeat this process for each action I want to apply. So I'll do it again with the next action, and then one more time. And what I'm doing here is layering these edits across all of the images instead of perfecting one image at a time. At this point, I sometimes use this diffused sun action, but not always. This is more of a stylistic choice, and I can run it as a batch or I can apply it to specific images depending on what they need. Okay, so at this point my color edits are done, and now I do something that might feel a little crazy. I give black and white versions of all the photos. This action creates a copy of each image, so now I have both a color and a black and white. Now let me show you how to create a favorites folder. Open your actions panel, click on the folder icon, name it, click OK. And then you can either drag your most used actions into that folder or copy and paste them. I prefer to copy and paste them. Now I'm going to show you how to create a save and close action. But pause for a second because this part is really important. I'm going to save you some heartache. When you create this action, make sure you are creating it from your original color photo, not the black and white version. Because if you create it from the black and white version, it can overwrite your color photo. And I learned this the hard way. So just trust me, always build your save action from your original file. To create it, click New Action, name it, hit record. Go to File, Save, then File, Close, and stop recording. And after you run it, always double check your folder to make sure everything's saved correctly. Okay, that's it. That's my full batch editing workflow using Photoshop Actions. Once you get this set up, it really does make your editing faster, more consistent, and honestly, just a lot more enjoyable. You're not guessing anymore, you have a process you can rely on. If this was helpful for you, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. I have a lot more coming that will help you simplify your editing and build a photography business that actually feels good to run. And if you try this workflow, I'd love to hear how it goes for you. Thank you so much for being here.